The calm before the storm. The vast, empty space between Earth and the enemy fleet seemed peaceful, almost serene. But there was no peace to be found here, not today. The stars twinkled quietly in the distance, their beauty betraying the chaos that was about to unfold. In the heart of Earth's fleet, the atmosphere was tense. Captain Emily Harrow stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, the flagship of Earth's defense. Her hands rested on the console in front of her, eyes focused on the holographic display. It showed the enemy fleet, a massive force, over 10 times the size of Earth's. The enemy, the Zarkar Empire, had conquered countless worlds, leaving nothing behind but destruction and fear. Earth was nothing but another step in their expansion. But Earth wasn't going to go down without a fight. Captain Harrow knew this might be their last stand. The fleet's commander had made it clear, win or die trying. She clenched her jaw, her mind racing. Earth's fleet was small, built from old ships that barely held together, but humanity was known for one thing above all: its resilience. Earth's ships were worn and patched together, but they had heart. And the enemy, well, they didn't see that coming. "Captain," said Lieutenant Parker, standing beside her. His voice was tense. "The enemy's forces are in position. They're preparing to launch." Emily nodded, though her mind was far away. She had spent days studying the enemy's tactics. The Zarkar Empire was ruthless. They crushed planets, exterminated entire species. They didn't negotiate. They didn't retreat. The enemy didn't see Earth as a real threat. They thought this battle would be over before it even started. They had underestimated humanity. "Captain, incoming transmission," Parker added, his fingers tapping the console. "It's from the enemy fleet." Emily raised an eyebrow. What could the Zarkar want with a message? They had no reason to talk. Still, she gestured for Parker to put it on the main screen. The holographic screen flickered, and the image of a Zarkar warlord appeared. His face was cold, his eyes dark with malice. He sneered as he looked down at Earth's fleet. "This is Commander Vrax of the Zarkar Empire," the warlord said, his voice deep and unsettling. "You are wasting your time, humans. We have already decided your fate. Your fleet is weak. Your planet is insignificant. Surrender now, and we might spare some of you." He paused, his cold smile widening. "But don't mistake this offer for mercy. The end of Earth is inevitable." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence behind. Emily's jaw clenched, and she could see the same tension on the faces of her crew. The Zarkar didn't just want to defeat them. They wanted to crush them, make an example of Earth for anyone who dared to resist. "We're not surrendering," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with determination. She turned to her crew, meeting each of their eyes. "We fight for every human, every family on Earth. We fight for survival." Lieutenant Parker nodded, and the rest of the crew followed suit. There was no backing down now. The enemy might think they were just another small, weak world. They were wrong. The humans aboard Earth's fleet had something the Zarkar couldn't understand: heart, courage, and a fierce will to protect their home. The ship's alarm suddenly blared, snapping everyone to attention. The enemy fleet was moving. The time to prepare was over. It was time for Earth to face the storm. "Set all ships to battle stations," Emily ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "Engage shields. Power up weapons. Let's show them we're not going down without a fight." The Vanguard hummed as its engines powered up. Across the bridge, the crew sprang into action, their movements precise and urgent. Emily felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had been entrusted with the lives of everyone aboard her ship and the survival of Earth itself. But despite the fear in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. A feeling that Earth had a secret weapon they had yet to reveal. Something that could tip the scales in their favor. A faint signal came through the ship's sensors. It was weak and scrambled, barely readable. Emily leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "What is that?" she asked, voice tight. Parker worked quickly, his fingers flying across the console. "I'm not sure, Captain. It's an unknown transmission, possibly from one of our scouts, or something we've missed." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Can you decode it?" "It's going to take time," Parker replied. "But I'll get it." The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The enemy fleet was moving fast, closing in on Earth's position. Emily could see it all on the screen. Hundreds of Zarkar warships, ready to strike. The calm of space was gone. The storm was coming, and they had no choice but to face it. As the countdown to battle began, Emily couldn't help but wonder, what if this signal was Earth's salvation? What if the enemy's overconfidence was their biggest mistake? Could humanity's strength, its spirit, be enough to overcome the greatest empire the galaxy had ever seen? The clock ticked down. The enemy fleet was just moments away. Earth's fleet was small, but they weren't alone. Every person aboard these ships had something that the Zarkar couldn't destroy. Hope. And hope was something the enemy had never learned to fear. But soon they would. The quiet hum of the Vanguard's engines was the only sound on the bridge, but it was a sound full of urgency. The crew was at their posts, the tense silence reflecting the heavy weight on their shoulders. They could all feel it, the pressure, the anticipation. Captain Emily Harrow stood at the front of the bridge, staring at the view of the distant enemy fleet. Her mind raced, calculating the odds and strategizing the impossible. Earth's fleet, a handful of ships pieced together through determination and innovation, was outmatched. The Zarkar Empire, with its vast and well-equipped armada, had the upper hand in every way imaginable. But Earth's fleet was something the enemy didn't count on. Earth had heart. "Captain, we've confirmed their weapons are charged and ready." Lieutenant Parker's voice broke through her thoughts. He looked up from his console, his face tense but steady. Emily nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the side of the command chair. "Status on our new weapon." Parker hesitated, glancing at the screen before meeting her gaze. "It's ready, but we don't know if it will work as expected. We've never tested it in a live battle. The risk is high." Her mind flicked to the weapon, a mysterious project that had been developed in secret. If it worked, it could turn the tide of the battle. If it didn't, Earth's fleet could be wiped out in minutes. They had one shot at this, one chance to make the enemy realize that underestimating humanity was their biggest mistake. "Captain, we're almost in range," a voice called from another officer. Emily stood straighter, her gaze unwavering. The Zarkar fleet was growing larger on the horizon. It was overwhelming, like a massive storm cloud that promised nothing but destruction. But that storm had no idea what was about to strike it. "Prepare the fleet. No matter what happens, we hold the line. We fight for Earth, for every single person back home. We do this together, or not at all." Her voice was strong, unyielding, the words flowing out with the confidence she wished she truly felt. She turned to Parker. "Activate the weapon. Now." The atmosphere in the bridge became electric with anticipation. Parker quickly tapped in the command. The Vanguard systems hummed to life, energy surging through the ship's hull. The weapon wasn't like anything Earth had ever used. It was a one-of-a-kind project, created by a small group of brilliant minds who had spent countless hours in secret to build something that could rival the power of the Zarkar's weapons. No one had known about it until now, not even the crew. "Weapon is active. Ready to fire on your command, Captain," Parker confirmed. The seconds seemed to stretch, the tension building with every passing moment. The enemy fleet was almost within striking distance, their massive ships looming like giants ready to crush everything in their path. But Earth's fleet was ready to fight with everything they had. "Fire," Emily ordered, her voice sharp. The Vanguard shuddered as the new weapon discharged. A massive beam of energy shot from the ship's main cannon, cutting through the vast space between the fleets. The beam hit one of the Zarkar ships, and for a moment, nothing happened. The enemy ship continued to move, seemingly unharmed. But then there was a loud, deafening explosion. The Zarkar ship split in two, a massive shockwave rippling outward as the explosion spread. The crew on Earth's fleet watched in stunned silence as the enemy ship was obliterated in seconds. Did we just? Parker whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Emily stood motionless, her eyes locked on the screen. She hadn't expected such immediate results. She hadn't expected the weapon to work that well. The weapon had surpassed all expectations. But now, the question loomed. Had they done enough to scare the Zarkar Empire? Would this be the turning point? Or would they simply escalate, bringing even greater destruction to Earth? The Zarkar fleet reacted immediately. A dozen ships veered off course, breaking formation. Panic spread through their ranks. Their commanders didn't know what to make of the weapon that had just obliterated one of their most powerful warships in seconds. The Zarkar Empire wasn't accustomed to losing ships so quickly. In all their years of conquest, they had never faced an enemy like this. The humans had managed to deliver a devastating blow, one they hadn't anticipated. "Captain, they're falling back," reported Lieutenant Marcos from the sensor station. His voice was filled with surprise. "They've lost communications across several ships, and there's confusion in their ranks." Emily's heart raced. "Is it enough?" she whispered to herself. "Is this really enough to make them hesitate?" Suddenly, the enemy's flagship, a massive warship unlike anything Earth had seen, began to move forward. It was larger and more heavily armed than anything Earth could have hoped to face. The flagship's commander, Vrax, had been silent during the initial chaos, but now his ship advanced slowly with purpose. Emily's eyes narrowed as she watched. This was their true test. The Zarkar Empire wasn't backing down. They had taken one punch, but now they were coming with everything they had. "Captain, they're charging their main weapons," Parker said urgently. "They've gone to full offensive mode. This is just the beginning." "We've only just begun," Emily replied quietly, her gaze locked on the enemy flagship. She could feel the pulse of the battle inside her, the energy, the fear, and the undeniable hope. Earth's fleet had a chance. A slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. In this moment, Earth wasn't going to surrender. The enemy might have thought Earth was weak, but they had no idea what humanity was capable of. The storm had come, but Earth wasn't going down without a fight. The silence on the bridge of the Vanguard was broken only by the steady hum of the ship's systems, the faint whirring of distant machinery, and the muffled sounds of a nervous crew preparing for the battle that would determine their fate. Captain Emily Harrow stood resolutely at the helm, her eyes fixed on the enormous screen ahead of her, where the enemy fleet was drawing ever closer. The time for preparation was over. The moment of truth had arrived. A wave of tension rippled through the crew as they locked into position. The Zarkar fleet, now moving in synchronized formation, loomed on the horizon like an unstoppable force, a massive wall of death. But the humans aboard Earth's fleet weren't about to back down. "All stations report ready, Captain," Lieutenant Parker said, his voice tight, yet steady. He turned from the console and met her eyes, his face pale but determined. Emily nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said softly. "Everyone, take a deep breath. We're about to face the storm. Trust each other. Trust the plan." In that moment, a strange calm washed over Emily. She had lived her life preparing for something like this. She had trained for this exact situation, and while her heart raced in her chest, she knew the crew relied on her strength, her clarity. The Zarkar might have the firepower, but Earth had something far more dangerous: unity, resolve, and a desperate will to protect what was theirs. "Enemy fleet is in firing range, Captain," Lieutenant Marcos reported, his voice full of warning. Emily's hand moved instinctively toward the console, pressing a series of commands that readied the fleet's weapons. Her crew was ready. They had no choice but to be ready. Earth's survival depended on this moment, and no matter the odds, they would not go down without a fight. "Fire," Emily ordered sharply. The The Vanguard shuddered as its weapons fired in rapid succession, beams of bright energy slicing through space. Other ships in the fleet followed suit, their cannons opening up, sending blasts toward the Zarkar fleet. For a brief moment, the battle became a surreal dance of light and energy, a streak of humanity's determination against the overwhelming darkness of the enemy. At first, it seemed like Earth's fleet stood no chance. The Zarkar ships were larger, faster, and more heavily armed. Their weapons tore through space, hitting Earth's ships with terrifying precision. Explosions echoed in the vacuum of space as shields were shattered and smaller ships were obliterated. For a split second, it looked as if Earth's forces might crumble before the might of the Zarkar. But Earth wasn't done yet. Emily gritted her teeth as she watched a Zarkar ship break through the line, heading straight for the Vanguard. The enemy had underestimated Earth's tactics, and now they were paying the price. Her fingers flew over the controls, and she adjusted the trajectory of the ship. Evasive maneuvers now, she shouted. The Vanguard dipped and spun, narrowly avoiding the blast from the Zarkar ship. The enemy vessel's fire missed by inches, its blast barely grazing the Vanguard's shields. Emily's heart raced, but she didn't let the fear show. "Return fire," she ordered, her voice low but commanding. The Vanguard fired back with full force, its energy beams hitting the Zarkar ship dead-on. This time, the blast was enough. The enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless, and in that moment, Earth's fleet realized something. The Zarkar Empire might be bigger, might be stronger, but they had underestimated one critical thing: humanity's unbreakable will to fight back. "Good shot, Captain," Parker said, his voice filled with relief, but there was no time for celebration. "Keep your focus," Emily replied quickly, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "This is only the beginning. Stay sharp." The Vanguard was holding its ground, but the battle was far from over. The Zarkar fleet was relentless, and now their flagship, the enormous warship known as the Dreadfang, began to move forward, its massive form blocking out the stars. Emily's pulse quickened. The Dreadfang was the heart of the Zarkar fleet, a ship of unimaginable power and firepower. Its weapons could obliterate an entire fleet in seconds. If they couldn't defeat the Dreadfang, Earth's fleet would fall, and the Zarkar would have the planet within hours. "Captain, the Dreadfang is locking onto us," Lieutenant Parker said urgently, his fingers dancing over the console. "It's charging its main cannon. If that thing hits us, we're done for." The Vanguard's shields flickered under the pressure, the energy waves from enemy fire creating a web of crackling energy around the ship. Emily gritted her teeth, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. There was no room for doubt. Earth's fleet had to outmaneuver this threat, or everything would be lost. "All ships, target the Dreadfang," Emily ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to disable their weapons, or we're finished. Focus all fire on their engine cores." The Vanguard's cannons fired again, but this time with more precision. The other ships in Earth's fleet coordinated their attacks, sending volley after volley at the Dreadfang. But the enemy flagship was formidable. Its shields absorbed most of the blasts, and the massive ship fired back with terrifying force. "Incoming fire," Lieutenant Marcos shouted. A barrage of energy blasts flew toward the Vanguard, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She slammed her fist on the console, desperate to avoid the impact. "Evasive maneuvers, now," she barked. The ship lurched to the side, narrowly dodging the blast that would have crippled it. "Captain, the new weapon is ready for use," Parker said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Should we fire?" Emily hesitated. They had used it once, and it had been effective, but using it now, against the Dreadfang, would be a gamble. If they missed, or if the weapon malfunctioned, they would have no other options. "We have no choice," Emily said, her voice steady, though inside, her heart pounded. "Activate the weapon. Take the shot." The Vanguard shuddered as the weapon charged. Emily's fingers gripped the console as the ship's energy surged. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. The massive Zarkar warship before them, the trembling Earth fleet, and the unknown future that awaited them. Then, with a sudden jolt, the weapon fired, sending a beam of pure energy hurtling toward the Dreadfang. The energy beam shot through space with incredible speed, its brilliance lighting up the dark expanse like a comet racing toward its target. For a moment, time itself seemed to stretch, the silence on the Vanguard's bridge suffocating as the crew watched the beam with bated breath. This was it. This was their one chance. The Dreadfang's massive form loomed in the distance, its powerful shields pulsing as it absorbed the energy from Earth's previous attacks. It seemed invincible, like a massive wall of steel and death. But Emily held her breath, her eyes fixed on the weapon's trajectory. She couldn't afford to blink, to lose focus. If this didn't work, Earth's fleet would be lost. The beam hit the Dreadfang's shields with a resounding shockwave, a wave of energy that seemed to ripple across space itself. The Dreadfang shook, its shields flaring up as they absorbed the brunt of the blast. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, and for a moment, it looked like it might be enough to break through. But then, to Emily's horror, the beam began to dissipate, the energy running out before it could do any real damage. "No," Emily muttered under her breath, her mind racing. Come on. For a moment, the Dreadfang seemed untouched, almost mocking their efforts. But then, something unexpected happened. A small explosion rippled across the flagship's hull, followed by another, then a third. And in that moment, Emily realized something. The energy beam had triggered a chain reaction. The Dreadfang wasn't invincible. Its shield had been damaged, and now its internal systems were starting to fail. The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity. "Captain, their shields are down," Parker shouted, his voice a mix of surprise and excitement. "We've breached their defenses." The crew of the Vanguard looked at each other, wide-eyed. It wasn't over yet. They hadn't won the battle, but they had made the first crack in the Zarkar flagship's impenetrable defenses. Now it was a matter of pushing their advantage before the enemy could recover. "Target their engine cores," Emily barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got one shot at this. If we destroy their engines, we cripple their ability to fight back." The Vanguard fired again, the cannons charging and releasing a powerful volley of blasts, each aimed at the Dreadfang's weak points. Emily watched, her heart in her throat, as the energy beams hit their target. The Dreadfang shuddered under the pressure, its massive form trembling. The shock waves rippled outward, and for a moment, it looked like the Zarkar flagship might collapse under the weight of Earth's relentless assault. But then the Dreadfang retaliated, its massive weapons powered up, charging with brutal force. The ground beneath Emily's feet vibrated as the enemy flagship unleashed a deadly barrage of energy blasts. They tore through space, cutting a swath toward Earth's fleet. "Brace for impact," Emily shouted, her hands flying over the console as she tried to evade the enemy fire. The Vanguard dipped sharply, narrowly avoiding the first wave of blasts, but the ship was rocked by the second wave. The shields flared under the pressure, and the entire ship groaned as though it might break apart. "Shields at 40%, Lieutenant Parker shouted, his voice laced with urgency. "We can't take much more of this." Emily gritted her teeth. They couldn't afford to lose their shields. Not now, not when they were so close. "Redirect power to shields. Keep them up as long as possible. We're not done yet." As the Vanguard dodged another blast, Emily's mind raced. The enemy flagship was still formidable, but they had cracked its defenses. Now it was time to finish the job. "All ships, coordinate with the Vanguard," Emily commanded. "Focus all fire on the Dreadfang. We've taken down its shields. Now we need to finish what we started." Her orders rang out across the comms, and within moments, Earth's fleet sprang into action. The smaller ships, despite their age and limited firepower, fired with everything they had. Energy beams and torpedoes streaked through space, smashing against the weakening Dreadfang with relentless fury. Emily watched as the enemy flagship's massive hull began to crack, pieces of its exterior exploding outward. But just as the Dreadfang seemed on the brink of collapse, the unthinkable happened. Another Zarkar ship, a sleek cruiser that had been lurking on the edges of the battlefield, darted forward with incredible speed. It swooped in between Earth's ships and the Dreadfang, its weapons already primed to fire. Before anyone could react, the cruiser unleashed a devastating blast of its own, aimed directly at the Vanguard. The crew screamed in panic as the blast collided with Earth's flagship. The Vanguard lurched violently, a jolt so strong that the lights flickered and the entire ship shook. Emily gripped the console, her knuckles turning white. The ship's systems screamed in protest, alarms blaring across the bridge. "We've lost power to starboard," shouted Lieutenant Marcos, his voice tinged with panic. "The shields are failing. We're exposed. Divert power to the starboard shields," Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't let them breach us. Fight back." The Vanguard was in critical condition, but the crew wasn't giving up. They couldn't afford to. Earth's survival was on the line, and they would do whatever it took to protect their home. As another blast from the Zarkar cruiser ripped through space, Earth's ships retaliated with all their remaining firepower. A final barrage of energy and missiles flew toward the Dreadfang. The explosions were deafening. Pieces of the Zarkar flagship exploded outward, engulfing the ship in a ball of fiery energy. The Dreadfang's once impenetrable exterior was now a shattered wreck, the enemy flagship now nothing more than a burning hulk floating in space. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, the dust of battle swirling in the void. But Earth's fleet knew that victory was still far from assured. The Zarkar were ruthless. They wouldn't let Earth go so easily. But for the first time in this war, the scales were tipped in humanity's favor. Emily exhaled slowly, her fingers shaking slightly as she looked at the remains of the enemy flagship. "We've got them on the ropes," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and determination. "But we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." The storm was far from over, but Earth had just made its mark, and the Zarkar Empire was about to learn the true cost of underestimating humanity. The silence that followed the destruction of the Dreadfang was unsettling, a brief pause in the chaos of battle. Emily Harrow stood motionless at the helm of the Vanguard, her mind still processing the unbelievable sight of the Zarkar flagship's wreckage floating lifelessly in space. Earth's fleet had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. The Zarkar were not a race to surrender easily. "Captain, we've got incoming transmissions from the Zarkar command ship," Lieutenant Parker said, his voice filled with a sense of caution. "They're requesting a ceasefire." Emily's eyes narrowed. The Zarkar had never shown any signs of negotiation, especially after Earth had just obliterated one of their most powerful ships. "Are they serious?" she muttered to herself, then turned toward Parker. "Put it through." A crackling noise filled the comm system, followed by a deep alien voice. "This is Commander Vrax of the Zarkar Empire. You have destroyed our flagship. This is unexpected. We demand immediate surrender of your forces and your unconditional submission to the Zarkar." The audacity of the request made Emily's blood boil. The Zarkar, after all their destruction, after their endless campaigns to dominate the galaxy, were now asking for surrender. It was a laughable thought, but even as she fumed, her mind remained sharp. She needed to think, to make the right choice, not just for the fleet, but for the survival of humanity. "Tell them," Emily began, her voice cold and firm, "that Earth does not surrender. We never have, and we never will. They can continue their assault, but it will cost them far more than they're willing to pay." A moment of stunned silence came from the other end of the transmission, and Emily's gaze remained locked on the screen. She could feel the weight of the decision she had just made. Rejecting a ceasefire was a gamble, but it was a gamble Earth had no choice but to take. If they showed even a hint of weakness, It could be their last mistake. "Captain, enemy ships are preparing to regroup," Lieutenant Marcos reported, his voice tense. "They're pulling back, but they're not retreating. They're reorganizing into a new formation." Emily clenched her fists, a sense of unease settling over her. The Zarkar were far from finished. Their empire was vast, and this battle, though significant, was only one small part of the larger war. If they managed to regroup, Earth's fleet might face a second wave, one even more devastating than the first. "We can't give them time to regroup," Emily said, her voice decisive. "We hit them now, before they can get organized. We take the fight to them." Without waiting for further confirmation, she turned to Parker. "Lieutenant, coordinate with the fleet. We move out in 5 minutes. We hit the Zarkar while they're vulnerable." As the crew sprang into action, preparing for the next wave, Emily's thoughts drifted to the larger picture. The Zarkar weren't just an enemy to Earth. They represented the very threat of extinction. Humanity had always fought to survive, and every victory, no matter how small, meant another day for the people back home. But victory was never guaranteed. The Dreadfang might have been destroyed, but the Zarkar still outnumbered them. Still, Earth's fleet had proven something. Humanity could strike back. They had the will, the ingenuity, and the spirit to win. Minutes later, Earth's fleet moved forward once more, leaving the wreckage of the Dreadfang behind. The enemy fleet had indeed reorganized, but their hesitation was evident. They didn't fully understand Earth's resolve. They hadn't fully grasped how dangerous a cornered human could be. The space between the two fleets closed quickly, the tension building with each passing second. Emily's heart pounded as she watched the Zarkar ships shift into their new formation. They were trying to box Earth in, to overwhelm the fleet with sheer numbers and firepower. The Vanguard shields were still weakening from the earlier assault, but there was no time to think about that now. The enemy wouldn't wait for Earth to recover. "Captain, incoming fire," Parker shouted, his voice laced with alarm. The Vanguard lurched as the first wave of Zarkar fire collided with its shields. The ship groaned under the pressure, but the shields held for now. It wasn't enough. The Zarkar were pushing hard, their weapons punching through space like thunderclaps. Explosions rocked the fleet, smaller ships falling under the brutal assault, their hulls torn apart by the enemy's superior firepower. "Return fire," Emily shouted, her voice full of urgency. "Keep their ships off us." The Vanguard fired back, its cannons charging as Earth's fleet unleashed a torrent of energy blasts. The Zarkar ships fought back just as fiercely, their weapons tearing into Earth's fleet with merciless precision. The battle had descended into chaos, the emptiness of space filled with the bright streaks of deadly energy and the distant sound of explosions. But even as Earth's fleet fought with everything they had, Emily could see the tide beginning to turn. Their ships were taking heavy damage, and the enemy's firepower was relentless. The Vanguard was no longer dodging with ease. Every movement was a struggle against the weight of the enemy's attack. "Captain, shields are failing," Marcos called out. "We need to get out of here, or we'll be wiped out." Emily's mind raced. She could feel the pressure mounting. The Vanguard was vulnerable. The rest of the fleet was struggling just as much, but there was no retreat. Earth didn't retreat. "We fight to the end," Emily shouted. "We don't back down. We push forward, no matter what." But just as she gave the order to continue the assault, something unexpected happened. The Vanguard scanners beeped urgently, a new signal cutting through the static of battle. "Captain, we're receiving a signal. It's coming from Earth," Parker said, his voice filled with shock. "They're sending reinforcements." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Earth had sent reinforcements. She hadn't expected it to come so soon, but she wasn't about to question the timing. With the arrival of fresh ships, Earth's fleet might just have a chance to turn the tide once more. "Get ready to receive them," Emily barked, as the crew quickly adjusted the ship's course to make room for the incoming reinforcements. As Earth's reinforcements arrived, The tide of battle began to shift. The Zarkar had underestimated humanity once again, thinking they could crush Earth's resistance. But the arrival of the reinforcements added new energy to the fleet. With Earth's fleet now bolstered by fresh ships, Emily knew that they had a fighting chance. The Zarkar weren't done, but humanity's resolve had just been strengthened. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a fight for the future of Earth, and Earth would not be defeated. The arrival of reinforcements brought a surge of hope to the beleaguered Earth fleet, but the Zarkar weren't so easily dissuaded. Their ships, though damaged, were still formidable, and their hatred for humanity only seemed to grow with every passing moment. The battle that had already torn the fabric of space apart was far from over. In fact, the Zarkar seemed to grow even more aggressive as they realized that Earth's reinforcements had arrived. The enemy fleet began to regroup, forming a tight formation of heavily armed ships. From the vanguard, Emily could see the Zarkar were preparing for their next big push. They had lost a flagship, but they were not a race that would yield easily, not when they still had the strength to fight. "Captain, we've received new intel," Lieutenant Parker said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "The Zarkar are consolidating their forces. They're preparing a full offensive." Emily clenched her jaw. This was it. This was the moment where Earth's fleet would either break through or be crushed under the weight of Zarkar power. The Vanguard had taken hits, and many other ships in the fleet were in worse shape. Their shields were failing, their ammunition was running low. Every ship was holding on by a thread. "Get the fleet in position," Emily said, her voice low and focused. "We won't give them a chance to regroup. We strike now. We take the fight to them." The crew scrambled to execute the order, the Vanguard turning sharply as Earth's ships rallied together, closing ranks. The Zarkar might have been preparing for an all-out offensive, but they hadn't anticipated how quickly Earth could adapt. "Captain, their fleet is charging their weapons," Lieutenant Marcos called out, eyes wide as he read the data coming through his screen. "Their firepower is going to be massive. Divert all power to shields. Full evasive maneuvers," Emily ordered, gripping the armrest of her chair. She didn't want to hear any more about what the Zarkar were doing. She knew what they were capable of. The only thing that mattered was how Earth's fleet responded. The Vanguard surged forward, engines roaring as it pushed through the debris of the battlefield. The other ships followed closely behind, weaving in and out of enemy fire. The battle had reached its crescendo, with both sides now locked in a deadly dance of precision and destruction. For a moment, the fleet's coordinated assault felt almost like a lull in the chaos, a brief quiet between the storms of battle. But Emily could sense the danger closing in. The Zarkar ships were moving in, and they were closing the distance faster than she anticipated. Every instinct told her that this was the most dangerous moment yet. "We need to break their formation," Emily muttered to herself, watching the Zarkar ships tightening around the fleet. Their goal was clear: surround Earth's forces and destroy them all in one concentrated burst. If they succeeded, the battle would be lost. "Captain," Parker's voice broke through the tension, "I've got an idea. If we can get to their command ship, we can disable their fleet's coordination. I'm seeing a weak point in their communications array. If we take that out, they'll be blind in space." The idea was risky, incredibly risky, but Emily knew they had no choice. If they didn't act now, the Zarkar would wipe them out. "Tell the fleet to follow our lead," Emily ordered. "We go for the command ship." The Vanguard shot forward, engines pushing harder than ever, the other ships trailing behind. They were making a direct run for the heart of the Zarkar fleet. The Zarkar's guns opened fire, blasting away at Earth's ships, but the Vanguard dodged and weaved with precise movements, avoiding the worst of it. The command ship was massive, its dark form a towering structure among the Zarkar fleet. It seemed almost impenetrable, its thick armor and powerful shields making it a fortress in space. But Emily was undeterred. She knew this was their only shot. "All weapons, fire at will." She shouted as the Vanguard and the other Earth ships closed in. The Vanguard unleashed its full arsenal, firing everything it had at the command ship. Energy beams slammed into its shields, making the ship shudder, but the shields held. Then suddenly, the Zarkar command ship responded with a massive surge of energy, sending a wave of destruction toward the Vanguard. The force of the attack knocked the ship off course, sending it spinning through space. Shields failing. Marcos shouted, "We're losing control. Get us back on target." Emily barked, struggling to regain control. Her heart raced as the Vanguard spun out of control, but the crew fought to stabilize the ship. In the chaos, Emily saw the other ships moving to cover them, forming a protective barrier around the Vanguard to ensure they could make the final push. "We can't hold them off forever," Parker said, voice tight. "They're getting too close. If we don't break their command, they'll wipe us out." Emily gritted her teeth. She couldn't afford to let that happen. Not now, not when they were so close to victory. Her eyes locked on the Zarkar command ship. They needed to get inside its defenses. "Take us in," Emily ordered. "We go in fast, no hesitation." With the power of the fleet behind her, the Vanguard adjusted its trajectory, hurtling straight for the heart of the Zarkar command ship's defenses. They would have to breach it quickly before the enemy could respond. The space between the ships closed quickly, and Emily could see the Zarkar fleet beginning to falter. The lack of coordinated fire was starting to show. Earth's fleet was breaking through, and the Zarkar were beginning to lose their edge. They weren't expecting this kind of aggression. The humans were relentless. The Vanguard slammed into the outer hull of the Zarkar command ship, using the sheer force of its speed and momentum to create a breach. Inside the ship, explosions rang out as the Vanguard's crew did everything in their power to disable the ship's systems. "Captain, we've done it," Parker shouted, eyes wide. "Their command systems are down. We've crippled their ability to control the fleet." Emily allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but there was no time to rest. The Zarkar fleet was still vast, and Earth's fleet was far from invulnerable. This was just the beginning. "All ships, break through the remaining forces," Emily commanded, her voice a steady beacon of leadership. "Now is our chance. Show the Zarkar what happens when they mess with humanity." The remaining Zarkar ships began to falter, their coordination in disarray. With Earth's fleet now free to target them without interference, they began to fall, one by one. It was a long battle, but now humanity had the upper hand. As the Zarkar ships began to break apart, one by one, Emily's heart beat with pride and determination. This fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest empires in the galaxy. Earth had just shown the universe that no force, no matter how powerful, could crush the spirit of humanity. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: humanity would not be underestimated again. The final moments of the battle were like a storm breaking over the ocean. The Zarkar fleet, once so vast and powerful, was now a fragmented force, scrambling in the aftermath of Earth's relentless assault. Their command structure had collapsed, their fleet's cohesion shattered. The Vanguard had delivered the blow that had broken their will to fight. But even now, as the last remnants of their ships drifted into the void, Emily knew the war was far from over. "Captain," Parker's voice broke through the tense silence that had settled over the bridge. "The Zarkar are retreating. They're pulling back into hyperspace." Emily's eyes never left the view screen, where the shattered remains of the Zarkar ships floated like broken debris. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing they had struck a decisive blow, but that satisfaction was short-lived. The Zarkar were only one part of a much larger conflict. The battle for humanity's survival had just begun. "Keep monitoring their movements," Emily ordered. "They may be retreating, but that doesn't mean we've won. Not yet." She could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. The battle had been fierce, but they couldn't afford to relax just yet. The Zarkar were a force to be reckoned with, and they would be back, stronger and more determined than ever. Earth had shown them its strength, but that wasn't enough to guarantee victory. The Zarkar would regroup, and when they did, they would come with even more power, more ships, more weapons. "Captain, the rest of the fleet is reporting significant damage," Lieutenant Marcos reported, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We've lost a lot of ships, and some of our forces are in critical condition. We need to make repairs." Emily nodded. The price of victory had been steep, and the toll on Earth's fleet was heavy. Many of their ships were barely functional, their hulls scorched from the onslaught of enemy fire. The crew was tired, battered, and worn from hours of intense combat, but they had survived. And in that survival, there was hope. "Get all ships to the nearest repair stations," she said. "Tell the fleet to hold position for now. We need to regroup and make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." As the vanguard began to turn toward the nearest repair dock, Emily took a moment to reflect on the battle. It had been a fight like no other, a battle not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. The Zarkar had underestimated them, believing that Earth would crumble beneath the weight of their invasion. But they had been wrong. Humanity had proven itself in the heat of battle, and now the universe would know that Earth was not a world to be ignored. "Captain," Parker said, his voice breaking into her thoughts, "we've received a transmission from Earth." Emily's eyes flicked to the screen as the message came through, clear and crisp despite the distance. The familiar face of General Thompson appeared on the screen, his expression stern but filled with pride. "Captain Harrow," he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority, "I'm calling to congratulate you and your crew on a hard-fought victory. The Zarkar have been dealt a significant blow today, but the war isn't over. Earth has mobilized all available forces, and will continue to support the fleet however we can." Emily listened carefully, taking in every word. The general's message was a reminder of the enormity of the task ahead. Victory in this battle had been hard-earned, but it was only one step in the greater war. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Emily replied, her voice steady. "We'll rebuild, we'll recover, and we'll keep fighting." General Thompson gave her a nod of approval. "Good. Stay vigilant, Captain, and know that Earth stands behind you." The transmission ended, leaving Emily with a renewed sense of purpose. Earth had sent its forces to support the fleet, and the people back home were ready to continue the fight. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Earth's fleet was in the process of making repairs, the ships refueling, patching up damaged systems, and restoring their weapons to full capacity. The crew worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that they had just made history, but there was no time for celebration. The Zarkar might be retreating for now, but they would return, and the next confrontation would be even more intense. "Captain, incoming transmission from the fleet," Parker said, interrupting her thoughts. Emily turned to face the screen, where Admiral Lennox's face appeared. His expression was grim, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Captain Harrow," he began, his voice steady, "I've reviewed the data from the battle. You and your crew have done an extraordinary job, but we can't afford to let our guard down. We've dealt a blow to the Zarkar, but they've already started to regroup. They'll be back, and we need to be prepared for the next phase of the war." Emily nodded. "We're ready, Admiral. We'll be here when they return." "Good," the Admiral replied. "You've proven that humanity has the strength to face this threat head-on, but we need to keep the pressure on. We'll be sending more reinforcements, and I expect you and your fleet to be ready." The transmission ended, and Emily turned back to her crew. The mission was clear. Earth had made its mark, but the Zarkar weren't finished. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over, and they would need every ship, every crew member, every resource to win this war. As the vanguard drifted toward the repair station, Emily felt a sense of resolve settle in her chest. They had won this battle, but the war was only beginning. The Zarkar would return, but humanity would be ready. They had proven that they could stand against even the mightiest of empires. This wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would fight for their future, no matter the cost. And as long as Earth's fleet remained in space, as long as there were soldiers like Emily Harrow willing to lead the charge, humanity would never give up. The war for Earth's future was just beginning, and they would fight to the very end.